Howdy, howdy, howdy. This is Ryan Acid Heads Murphy, coming to you with another edition of Smarking Off. This time we're going to be talking about realism. You like the big font here, realism. I don't know. I thought that was kind of funny. Just realism. Say it with me. Realism. Okay. So, what do I mean by realism in pro wrestling? Well, pro wrestling is an interesting thing. I've mentioned this before. It's kind of in the middle. For the sporty type people, it's too fictional, and for the people who prefer fiction, it's a little too real. It's right in the middle, and for the people who want it on either extreme, it's not good enough, which is unfortunate. I honestly believe pro wrestling could be its own thing, right there with theater and movies and TV shows and all that as its own specific form of entertainment. Not just a genre, but a specific form of entertainment. Which is why I believe that it's perfectly fine to do comedy wrestling and serious wrestling, horror wrestling if you wanted, sci-fi wrestling, fantasy pro wrestling, whatever you want to do. I think you can do whatever you want with pro wrestling. It needs to be established as its own form of entertainment, its own unique thing. Which is kind of where it needs a good PR agent, basically. So, what do I mean by realism? Just where does the realism need to lie? Well, the basic premise of pro wrestling is it's a competition. It's based on the idea of boxing and more modern MMA, although as much as MMA people will hate this, MMA was born from pro wrestling. Because it was guys like Antonio Inoki, a pro wrestler, working with martial artists and boxers like Muhammad Ali and others like that who kind of created mixed martial arts to begin with. So, all you MMA fanboys that hate on pro wrestling, go fuck yourselves. If it wasn't for pro wrestling, you'd have no MMA, stupid motherfuckers. Nah. I'll be a little childish. I'm allowed. So, since pro wrestling is rooted in this idea of a combat sport, a competition combat sport, that is where the realism should lie. Now, this is where we start to get into where do you kind of branch things off. I think it depends on, again, the presentation. If you want to do like a sci-fi pro wrestling thing, go ahead. Give it a shot. I think it could work. It would be very interesting if you had the budget to pull it off. And guys like Will Ospreay would be perfect for that sort of thing, because you could have all the acrobatics and they wouldn't have to sell as much because, they're cyborgs, perhaps, or they're mutants. Give it that little sci-fi touch, and suddenly all that sort of pro wrestling really works. Or fantasy. They're not human anymore. Horror, even. Any genre. I think you could do any genre with pro wrestling if you give it the right presentation and do it the right way and have the right people doing it. You just have to have the right presentation, the right spin. But if we're talking traditional pro wrestling, then I feel that realism is important. Things need to be more logical. It should look like a fight. Like you're trying to beat each other. Now, yeah, again, with the flippity-flip stuff, as some like to call it, if you're going to kind of face off, like Ospreay and Ricochet would actually do this in their matches, kind of feeling each other out at the start of the match before they would get more serious later on. They would start off kind of trying to one-up each other, which is just fine. It's people who only see highlights that do a lot of the complaining about those kinds of matches. They don't watch the whole thing, so they don't see when they're actually selling and working on the mat and doing all the other stuff that they will actually do through the course of a 20-30 minute match, if however long it is. They only see the highlight reel, so they don't see any of that stuff, so they assume it isn't there because they're stupid. Presumptuous, perhaps, more than stupid, bit of both, more often than not, I would imagine. But there is a tendency for a lack of selling and overly obvious cooperation. Will Ospreay had a match against Marty Scurll a few months ago for the New Japan light heavyweight title. The match was okay. I don't really care for Marty Scurll very much. He's not done anything to impress me so far. That's a different thing. I'm not going to harp on that. But it was painfully obvious at times that they were working together. And it's one of those things, you're trying to watch the match and you're trying to kind of get into it and suspend disbelief. And then you can see things like just waiting to do certain things. Some of their chain wrestling, especially when they were chaining together, doing like the ECW style chain together of pinfalls. There was something about the way they did it in ECW, especially like Jerry Lynn and RVD would do stuff like that, and there was just it wasn't just those two. They Lance Storm and Jerry Lynn did it a lot too. Jerry Lynn did it a lot with his different opponents, where they would chain together different pinfalls attempts. But in ECW, they had a way of doing it that made it feel a little bit rougher, a little less coordinated and planned out. And watching that Marty Scurll and Ospreay, it was just too coordinated, I guess. It was just too obvious that it was all planned out. I mean, it looked like they were doing a series of routines that they had worked out together and had done several times. Probably done a lot of times. And it was just a little too obvious. So, not a fan of that match. It was okay, but it wasn't great, mostly because of that. It killed the realism, basically. So sometimes, you want to rough things up. You don't want everything to look absolutely picture perfect. You don't want to look like you're working a choreographed routine with a partner that you've worked with 100 times already. You need to change things up, dirty things up, rough things up a bit. Make it look more real. So I don't really have a problem with the high-flying stuff and the flips and the twists and turns and the acrobatics. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with them being too clean and too coordinated and too choreographed. I have a problem with them not selling enough, because it kills the realism. And again, if you did a sci-fi pro wrestling show and built in reasons why these things were happening, it might come across better. But if you're going for real world, you need to try and make things more realistic. You need more realism. So when it comes to that sort of thing, I do believe, and I agree with like Jim Cornette. I don't agree with everything he says, because he thinks that his idea of pro wrestling is the only right one, and I believe that pro wrestling can be anything if it's presented the right way. And it's really the problem of the perception of pro wrestling more than pro wrestling itself having a problem that holds it back from being able to do lots of different things. But if you're going to do real world pro wrestling, a promotion that deals in the real world and isn't trying to do sci-fi or fantasy or whatever, and again, comedy promotions, again, I don't have a problem with it. That's what they present themselves as, and it works for them. So, no issue. But when it comes to trying to do real world matches that are supposed to be taking place in the real world, and it's built around this idea of a combat sport, a competition, it should look like that. Okay? Yes, everybody knows what pro wrestling is, and that it is a work, basically. It doesn't have to look like one. So that's all I'm saying. Rough things up. Stop making everything look so coordinated. Dirty up your routines. Screw up now and again. And it all comes down to such simple little things. When you're up on the turnbuckles, fight. Wrestle with each other. Struggle before you do your moves. If you're going to be doing those chains of pinning different pins like they did in ECW, don't be so quick and crisp and always exactly on point. Rough things up a bit. There's any number of things. It's like, watch old ECW and actually pay attention to some of the stuff that they would do to rough things up and make it look less coordinated. Don't just look at what the moves they're doing. Look at the nuances. Any number of things. I don't know. I can't think of anything else right offhand, but that's really my point about realism, is that if you're going for real world pro wrestling, it should be more realistic. So just try to make it look more realistic. Sell the fucking moves. Make it look like a fight. That's all I'm saying. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.